If anybody else trickles in, they'll just be late. So the first thing I'd like to establish is artists. Who are they? So if I were to ask you to think about who would you consider to be an artist, or what professions would you consider to be an art, what would be some examples you could think of?
J-Lo.
J-Lo. Okay.
That's a good one.
Yeah, no question, right?
Obviously, Michelangelo, Picasso.
Okay. So Walt Disney made movies, right? He did theme parks. What else? What are some other examples of art that people do? Would you consider,
Culinary arts.
Yeah.
Okay. So tell me this. If you were to compare an artist with a surgeon, which one would you say has more skill?
Oh, boy. It's different. I think it's different.
Would you consider surgery a form of art?
Yeah.
So the point is, how about teaching as a professor? Is there a form of art in teaching? So the point is that each of us in our individual jobs or professions, you can think of what you do as an art. And that is important to establish because as I've studied history, there is a process that artists go through in order to become an artist. And when you do that process and follow that process, you become creative yourself. Okay, once you follow that process. So there's two things we're going to talk about today. The first is becoming an artist, and the second is the creative process once you become one. Okay? Now, a great example of this is Leonardo da Vinci. He was once asked to design a shield. And what he didn't do is go home and lock his door and turn on Enya music to come up with an idea for the shield. Rather, he went and did something that people at the time thought was crazy. He went and gathered snakes, lizards, birds, bats, insects, and every animal he could possibly find, and he brought them in so he could study them. And he used all of these animals to help him design a poison-breathing dragon. Okay? And what I love about this story from history is that Leonardo da Vinci knew the process of creativity. He knew that great artists don't just try and come up with things on their own. They look places for inspiration. And this is what Leonardo da Vinci did. He was constantly looking for inspiration to help him in what he was doing. Now, being able to just create things is not the only part about being an artist. And something else that's important to understand is that creativity is not what we think. Creativity is not something that some people are born with and some people are not. It's something that we each have. The problem is that some people develop it and some people don't. And that's why some people are more creative than others. It's not that they were born that way, they just developed it more than other people. So it's important to recognize that when you think about creativity and you think about yourself, you can be creative, and it's not something that you either have or you don't. It's something you can develop. Now, the second aspect of creativity that I want to point out is that it's not just creating things, but it's being able to find creative solutions. So a great example of this was a young man who grew up watching Walt Disney, watched him on the TV, and every day he would love to go to the TV and watch Walt Disney as he would take people through his studio and introduce them to the artists that are working on the films. He'd watch the artists as they draw Donald Duck and Mickey Mouse, and as they're working on making Snow White and all these other things, he would watch all of that on TV. And he knew one day he wanted to be an animator. But as he grew up, that became clear to him that that was not going to be a reality because he was not very good at art. So he came up with another solution. He said, well, if I'm not going to be able to do it on paper, maybe I can do it on a computer. So when he was in college, he developed a system on a computer that would enable people to create art on a computer. And his goal was to create the very first film ever created entirely from a computer. He wanted to be the first person to create an animated movie that was done entirely from a computer. and he did it. And that movie was Toy Story. And the company he founded was Pixar. His name was Ed Catmull. Ed Catmull was creative. He wasn't able to draw, but he did figure out a way to find a solution to something he wasn't able to do. Ed Catmull was creative at finding solutions. And so that's why I wanted to point this out, is that creativity it doesn't mean that you're going to be great at scrapbooking. Creativity means that you're going to be able to create, whether that's solutions or products or ideas, whatever that is. Creativity applies to all of us, as each of you has an art that you're working to perfect. Now, the process to creativity, so actually becoming an artist, is the first thing that we're going to talk about, that process. Now, this process is one that has been followed throughout time. For history, the same process has been followed. Yet, people think that they have to rediscover the wheel. But the process has been there forever, and people have forgotten about it. So I want to point this out to you. The first step in becoming an artist is to become a student. Now, Ryan Serhant is a realtor out of New York. He was on a TV show. It's called The $1 Million Listing. He is selling real estate in downtown Manhattan, multi-million-dollar deals, okay? So he's considered to be one of the most successful realtors in the United States. He's on a panel where there's a bunch of people that are asking questions of other entrepreneurs that are on the panel. One person raises their hand and they reach out to Ryan and they say, Ryan, I'm looking at going into the field of real estate. And I don't know where to start. What advice would you have for somebody who's just getting into the field? And he said this. He said, what I would do is I would go out and I would find the absolute best realtor that you can possibly find and work for them for free. What Ryan knew is that in order to become great at your craft, you must first become a student. Learn from the people who have done it best. People who want to skip this step and think that they can figure it out on their own, maybe they can, but they'll spend their whole life trying to get something that somebody else could have taught them in 10 minutes. So the first part is you must become a student. Now, who can we go to become students? Like, where can we go to learn? Who can we go to study to become masters of our craft? That's the question. And some people think, I don't have anybody. You often hear about finding a great mentor, and people say, I don't have any great mentors that I can go to. And to that, I would say, BS. The opportunities for us to find mentors and people we can learn from is endless. They are everywhere. For me, here are some of the people that I learned from: Gary Vaynerchuk, Richie Norton, Jeff Goins, Ryan Holiday, Brene Brown, Walt Disney. The list goes on and on. I have been mentored by each of these people, but I haven't met a single one of them. But I don't need to. The fact is that people that often are very successful share their secrets. They share everything they've spent their life studying. That's what these people do. The problem is that we don't go and look for those things that they share. So each of us has the opportunity to be mentored by anybody we want, period. We just don't think we can, or we don't look for those things. So the opportunity is there. Most people just haven't connected the dots, that these people are offering to be your mentor throughout all the content that they put out, whether it's on YouTube, in books, wherever. The content is there. T.S. Eliot said this: if you see a great master, you will always find that he used what was good in his predecessors and that it was this which made him great. So T.S. Eliot, who was a writer, understood this very same concept. That if you want to be good, learn from your predecessors, those who have come before you and have already figured it out. Okay? Now, another part about being a student is being observant. This, I think, is one of the most essential parts, is being observant. And as I've thought about this, like, what makes people observant and other people not observant? And I think there's one thing that is centered around. And that is the people that are observant are looking for something. So if and I'll be an example, I'm working on creativity, and I've been thinking about it. So everywhere I go, everything I read, everything I listen to, I'm looking for creative examples. And guess what? I find them. So in your business or whatever it is that you're working on, if you're looking for something in particular, you'll find it. But you have to have something specific you're looking for. So what I would encourage is, if you haven't already, pick out something that you're looking for. Write it down or consciously say, yes, this is what I'm looking for. When you go into hotels, when you go into grocery stores, when you listen to someone talk on YouTube, whatever it is, you're looking for that thing that you can learn from or implement into your life. I think one of the greatest examples of this is Charles Darwin. Charles Darwin was not considered to be overly intelligent. In fact, people thought he was less than intelligent. But one thing that set him apart from everybody else was how observant he was in learning and watching everything around him. He said this. He said, I think I am superior to the common run of men in noticing things which easily escape attention and in observing them carefully. That's what he said set him apart from everybody else. It wasn't his intelligence. It wasn't his innate capacity for this, that, or the other. He was simply more observant than everybody else. And I can guarantee you that if you become more observant in watching and learning from other people, their mistakes, their successes, and everything around you, that is an essential part of becoming a student and of becoming a great artist. Another part of being a student, and especially part of being observant, at my work, one of the things that happens all the time is people will say, I've been looking at this document or I've been looking at this page and I'm missing something. I'm not seeing it. There's some kind of error that I can't get past and I can't see it. I need somebody else to come take a look at this. So they'll often say, I need a new set of eyes, right? And why is it that people say that? What causes that? Well, the reality is, it's because we've become too familiar with something. And being familiar with something isn't bad if you invite unfamiliarity on a constant basis. Familiarity, and this is the lesson, numbs the senses. When everything around us and everything we do becomes so familiar, our senses become numb. So it is essential, if you want to be creative, to invite unfamiliarity into your life. How you do that, that's up to you. Some people travel. I go and travel and I get new perspectives on how people do things in different countries. Or for me, I read. I get new perspectives, how people do this, how people do that, how they think about this, how they react in these situations, and it gets me thinking. I invite unfamiliarity into my life on a constant basis, and that helps me to be creative. If you are not, your creativity will ultimately be hindered. So it is essential on this path of becoming an artist that you invite unfamiliarity into your life on a consistent basis. Now, the second part on this process of becoming an artist is to become a thief. And I love this because it's shocking to some that I would recommend that you become a thief in the most legal way possible, even though I think Steve Jobs walked the line on this one. So Steve Jobs is a great example of being a thief. In fact, he's one of the best. Steve Jobs was once invited to the Xerox research facility, and when he went into the Xerox research facility, he was walked over to one of the computers that they were using, and he stopped, and he was amazed at what he saw. He was looking at the computer, and he noticed that they were using this system that had icons on the screen that people could click on. They were using what was called a graphic user interface. Xerox was. They came up with it and they designed it for the systems they were using. Steve Jobs saw this and was floored. They didn't have anything close to that at Apple. He thought, oh my gosh, this is brilliant. Then he looked over and they had this strange device that was next to the computer that they could use to move a cursor across their screen. They were using a mouse. And Steve Jobs looked at this and I thought, I'm taking this back to Apple. So he went back to Apple and told everyone at Apple, hey, you guys should go over to the Xerox research facility and just go look around, is what he said. So Steve Jobs goes back and he uses the technology that Xerox had to create a graphic user interface and a mouse for the Apple computer. Steve Jobs understood more than anybody else, actually, what the great artists understand is you have to become a thief. Look for great ideas everywhere and then implement those or make them better. This is what Steve Jobs knew, and he implemented it. Now, he actually said this particular quote so often that they often mistake Steve Jobs for coining this. Good artists copy, great artists steal. This is from Pablo Picasso. Steve Jobs said this so often in the workplace that they thought it was from him, but it wasn't him. This started a long, long time ago. Great artists have been doing this for history, and they know that if you want to be a great artist, you have to be looking for other ideas and things that you can steal from other people and implement those. Carissa is a great example, and when she wants to be Steve Jobs, she goes to Pinterest. She goes to Pinterest and is constantly looking at great ideas, creative things that she can steal or copy. And there's a misconception that if I'm going to be creative, I have to do something that's never been done. And that's part of the thing that stops people from being creative, is they think, I don't want to do what somebody else has done, or I want to create something that's entirely original. And that's going to stop you in your tracks. And that's not the creative process. That's not how it works. First, we become students, then we become thieves. So Carissa is a great thief. She goes on, she finds things on Pinterest, and then she makes them. She copies, she steals on a daily basis. I'm going to have to report her. Okay, so we have these things in our house all over the place. But something's crazy has happened over time, and there's an interesting thing that happens when we copy the work that others have done, especially when it's something you've never done before. The very act of copying what somebody else has done is an acquisition of skills for you. Because often you're doing something that you don't know how to do that somebody else has already figured out. So once you do that thing, you've actually acquired new skills that you didn't have before, which in turn make it so that you can go out and create your own things with the new skills that you've acquired. That's why this process is here. Where should you look? Steal from anywhere that resonates with inspiration or fuels your imagination. Devour old films, new films, music, books, paintings, photographs, poems, dreams, random conversations, architecture, bridges, street signs, trees, clouds, bodies of water, light and shadows. Select only the things to steal from that speak directly to your soul. If you do this, your work and theft will be authentic. Where should you look? The answer is everywhere. Okay? So like I was saying, once you've done the first two things, first you become a student, then you become a thief, then you can create. This is the process. And the reason those two things come first is because once you've done those things, then you're going to be able to start creating things on your own, original things. Okay? This is actually not the finished product, but this is something that Carissa made, my wife, that it doesn't exist. You can't find it anywhere. She created it entirely on her own. She used a scroll saw, she cut everything out, she painted everything. This is all her own idea. But the skills that she used to create these things, she acquired from copying others. That's how the creative process works. So what you don't know about being original is that things that are original are often copied from other things. What most people don't know is that Steve Jobs didn't create the MP3 player. The MP3 player already existed. Somebody had already invented the MP3 player. He took the MP3 player and turned it into an iPod. Somebody had already invented it. Steve Jobs didn't invent the phone or the cell phone. He took the cell phone and made it better. He was great at taking other ideas, great ideas, and making them better. This is what we do when we make something that is original. You first copy. And people think if you want to make something original, you have to create this whole new concept, this whole new idea. That's not how it works. You find great ideas and then you make them better, and that is being original. Creativity is not about being original. It's about learning to rearrange what has already been in a way that brings fresh insight to old material. Innovation is really iteration. Making connections in seemingly unrelatable areas. Another great example of this is actually Steve Jobs. So he had a computer, and he wanted to prevent computers from falling and breaking if anybody tripped on a cord. So if you're walking, and he didn't want the situation to be where if you're walking and you trip on a cord, it pulls over the computer and your computer's destroyed. So naturally, he went and looked at rice cookers and fryers. It's a perfect connection, right? No, it's not. This is the thing with creative people. They look at seemingly unrelatable areas. You connect, you have to go out of the box and look in areas that don't seem to connect. So Steve Jobs was fascinated by the technology that these Chinese people were using on rice cookers and fryers. On all of their rice cookers and fryers, they had plug-ins that were magnetic. They would plug into the rice cooker or the fryer, but so if anybody walked by and hit the cord, it would unplug, but the rice cooker or fryer wouldn't move. I thought, wow, this is a great idea. Took it back, and he made this neat invention called MagSafe, which is what everybody uses on every MacBook Pro or MacBook. There's a magnetic connection that plugs right into your computer. And he stole the idea that was already being used on rice cookers and fryers. See, great people that are creative look in other areas that seemingly wouldn't go together. But he takes great ideas and he puts the two together. Curiosity is another concept for being original and creating things that is counter to what people think. People think that curiosity is what leads people to all of these things, to more research, more information, coming up with interesting ideas. But the fact is that there's something that comes before curiosity. Research found that curiosity is actually a gap in one's knowledge. So it's not that you become curious and then everything else stems from that. Rather, we have to go out and learn and study. And once we find that there's a gap in our knowledge, that's when we become curious. So for example, if I am getting into a business for the first time, and I'm starting to learn everything there is about this business and about this certain area, and then I wonder to myself, what about this? That's what curiosity is. It's the gap in one's knowledge. And the only way that we have a gap in our knowledge is if we first go out and learn. See, it's backwards. People think that curiosity is what leads to everything else. No, first we go out and learn. And then when we realize what we don't know, then we become more curious. And curiosity breeds curiosity. People that are super curious are always curious because there's always gaps that they're finding in their knowledge. The more you know, the more you realize you don't know. That's how the process works. So now that we've talked about becoming an artist and how to create things, now we're going to talk about the creative process. And the creative process is one that is extremely difficult. To create anything that is meaningful and that lasts, it is extremely difficult. Ed Catmull, founder of Pixar, says that when they create a movie, their goal is to go from suck to not suck. To help illustrate how bad their products are when they first start, their movies are, people have no idea how far their original concepts are on movies from where they end up. So I'm actually going to give you guys a couple of examples. Monsters, Inc. started out this way. And who here has seen Monsters, Inc.? Okay, so just about everybody. So when you hear this, you're going to be blown away that this was the original script or storyline for Monsters, Inc. A 30-year-old man who was coping with a cast of frightening characters that only he could see, he's an accountant or something, he hates his job. And one day, his mom gives him a book with some drawings in it that he did when he was a kid. He doesn't think anything of it, and he puts it on the shelf. That night, monsters show up, and nobody else can see them. And he thinks he's starting to go crazy. These monsters start to follow him everywhere he goes, to work, on dates, everywhere. But it turns out that these monsters are all fears that he never dealt with as a kid. He becomes friends with them, and eventually he conquers his fears, and they slowly begin to disappear. This is Monsters, Inc. This is how it started out. And you look at the final product from this original script, they're miles apart. This is the creative process. We have an idea, I want to accomplish this, and we start, and where we start often is super far from where we end up. But it's important to recognize that if we want to do something that is creative, there's a ton of iteration and there's a ton of change on that process. Another example, Up. Imagine you guys have seen Up. Yeah. In the first version, there was a castle floating in the sky, completely unconnected to the world. In this castle lived a king and 2 sons. They were each vying to inherit the kingdom. The sons were opposites. They couldn't stand each other. One day, they both fell to earth. As they wandered around trying to get back to their castle in the sky, they came across a tall bird who helped them understand each other. This is Up. It is crazy when you realize how much change has to happen in the creative process and how difficult it is. Another great example of this is Michelangelo. Michelangelo talked about taking something or seeing a piece of art in something that is raw. When we look at this, we don't see anything. This is the creative process. It starts out with nothing. A mold of clay, a giant slab of marble that for us is it's not value. It doesn't have any value. We don't want this. But Michelangelo says that there's something inside of it. We have to try and get that out. He made this out of a slab of marble, which is beyond my comprehension, how a human is capable of making something so incredible. This is what he said. Every block of stone has a statue inside of it, and it is the task of the sculptor to discover it. This is the same thing that Ed Catmull did when he was creating movies. They have an idea, they have a concept, they have this big old slab of marble, and their goal is to get David out of it. This is the creative process. So now that we know how to be creative, what should we make? Okay, what should we do? Now that we understand the creative process, what should we do? Now, this concept, understanding this principle of everything that I have studied and learned with creativity, this particular principle is, I believe, the most profound and the most significant. Draw the art that you want to see. Start the business that you want to run. Play the music that you want to hear. Write the books that you want to read. Build the products that you want to use. Do the work that you want to see done. What should you do? Make the music that you want to hear. What do you not see in the world that you want to see? This is what we create. What we create is what we want to see more of. That is what artists do. That is what we do to create something that adds to the world. And for me, this is what I do. I go out and I create the things that I want to hear, the things that I want to see, the things that I want to learn more about. I don't care what anybody else thinks. I do it because this is what I want to see. This is the music that I want to hear. So whenever you ask yourself, what should I do? The answer is create the music that you want to hear. Okay? So fear. So I'm going to ask you guys, what role do you think fear plays in the creative process? What role does fear play in the creative process?
Good or bad? Well, fear can stop you dead in your tracks
Why?
because your mind goes down this path of, if I do this, nobody will like it.
So you're afraid of
Rejection.
what other people will think of what you do. Okay.
The flip side too is fear of being average
Yeah,
motivates people to be better.
that's true. Yeah, so it could be used. There's another great example. I'll have to get that for you of a guy that feels like fear is his greatest asset. I'll have to get that for you. I love that quote. But fear, for someone who wants to create things, it is often the problem with fear is that we tie what we create to the reaction people have to what we create. So if what we create and what we do people don't like, that means that they don't like us, and that we then are not valuable. That is the equation that we have in our mind, and that is why we don't create things with everything that we have. If we do, maybe we'll hold ourselves back. Well, I just copied someone else. But when we try and do something that is entirely us and put it out there, that is extremely vulnerable. That's tough to do. One of my favorite examples, there's two, but one example of somebody who used fear in the wrong way was F. Scott Fitzgerald. He was the author of The Great Gatsby. He wrote that book, and he was considered one of the greatest writers of our time. Okay? He wrote The Great Gatsby. He comes out with the book, the critics read the book, and they all said it was terrible. They hated it. They said it was the worst book that he's ever written, The Great Gatsby. And it wasn't long after that he killed himself. He said, everything, what I've created, people don't like, and therefore I can't live with myself. So he killed himself. About 25 years later, they were going through World War II, and they decided that they wanted to give a pick-me-up to the veterans. So they sent out 120,000 copies of The Great Gatsby to all of the veterans. And from there, all of the families of the veterans loved the book, and they shared it with their families and their families. And to date, the book has sold about 25 million copies. And he killed himself over that book. And that's what happens when we tie what we do to our self-worth. Now, a great example of somebody who doesn't do this is Elizabeth Gilbert. She said, I accidentally wrote a bestseller. I accidentally wrote a bestseller. And what she said when she was describing this was that I wrote 6 books before I wrote a book that ended up selling millions of copies. But the thing is that every book that I've written, I cared about equally. And I never wrote any book thinking this is going to be the bestseller. I wrote because I love to write. And that is when fear no longer has a hold. When we create because we love to create. We do things because we love that process. And if we're doing that thing, we're creating those things for outside approval or for success that others say or acclaim, when something doesn't go the way you want it, you'll end up giving up. Real artists create because they love to create. And that's how fear no longer has a hold on anyone that wants to create. So, what happens when it doesn't work? What happens when we go out and we create something and nobody likes it? The answer is make more art. What other choice is there? So if we go out and we try and do something and it doesn't work, what is the alternative? Give up. Never try again. So the converse is to keep trying. Make more art. That is the true color and motto of an artist. If something doesn't work out, my only response to everything is make more art. So my encouragement for each of you, happy stealing and make more art. That's it. Yeah. Okay, well, thanks, guys.